Live.
Hey!
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 Yeah, this is the most exciting part of every Monday afternoon. Last week I think I called it Friday, but yeah, we tend to do this every Monday. And the most exciting part is when Kelly hits the button to go live, and you and I are sitting here for 10 seconds frozen, waiting to see if we actually are live. So welcome.
Welcome, and thanks, Kelly.
It looks like it's working. Nick Archuleta, President of North Dakota United, Tom Gerhardt, Director of Public Affairs, and we're here to give you another live update on all the happenings at our nation's capital and our state's capital. And we'll get to your trip to the East Coast a little bit later on, but a lot to talk about here locally, Nick. And thought we'd start with House Bill 1328, which is Representative Rick Becker's bill dealing with education savings accounts, which we correctly call vouchers.
Yeah, and we did correctly call them vouchers. And in fact, when he was introducing the bill, he referred to it as a scheme. And I quickly concurred with that analysis, and it sure is. Basically, it's a way to take private money, or public money, I'm sorry, and channel it into private schools. And we have a long history of being against those kinds of schemes. They tend to weaken the public schools, and they're just not very well thought out. And it's just wrong. We don't, in North Dakota, have a history at all of taking public money and putting it into private education. If somebody wants to send their child to private schools, more power to them. Just don't ask the other folks in North Dakota to pay for that decision. Anyway, yes, it did get turned into a study. And that's a very good thing, that typically things would get turned into studies and they go away. And I think that's what's going to happen here, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, and it's waiting to be voted on by the full House.
Yeah.
But as you said, it appears some good news early. As we approach the midpoint, we're almost at crossover here, and it's kind of a little bit of a lull at the Capitol in some ways, as the committees have heard all of their bills, I guess, for the most part. So.
Yeah, I think there are just a couple that may be still lingering out there, but the important thing to note is that we have managed, I think, at first blush, to have really tamped down some of the more offensive legislation that was coming our way. We of course have the budget issues that still need to be resolved. I had a discussion this morning with the Speaker of the House, Representative Carlson, and he let me know that there's still $860-some million underwater. But I also had a conversation with Pam Sharp at the Office of Management and Budget, and she said that's not anything out of line for this time during the legislative session. So we're going to be moving forward. Yeah,
a lot of things heading to appropriations and a lot of big decisions to be made, of course, down the line.
Yeah.
And we're still waiting for that March revenue forecast, which will help the lawmakers determine where they can allocate that money. So if you have any questions, again, every week, just on the Facebook thread, type in your question or comment, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. And we thank you for joining us. Some more good news from last week. Senate Bill 2186, that Education Innovation Bill. An NDU member and Senator Aaron Oban carried that bill to the Senate floor, where it passed unanimously. That's pretty exciting stuff.
It is pretty exciting. I mean, one of the reasons it passed unanimously is it doesn't cost anything. But what this bill will do is it'll just really allow school districts and teachers to open up the innovation tap, if you will, and let some of this stuff flow. I mentioned before, I think it was last week, that on this bill, that if students are engaged in a work thing that is related to their schooling, they can potentially get credit for that. It'll help the school districts to say, you know what, seat time isn't necessarily as important as actually doing something, so that project-based learning could really take off. And on that note, we are hosting we're taking part in a presentation that the Superintendent of Public Instructions, Kirsten Baszler, has put together related to project-based learning. We'll be doing that Thursday, and the governor will be there, and legislators will be there, and so we can highlight, we can do that against the backdrop of this innovation bill, and I think it's going to be very, very well received.
Anyway, I know the Senator Oban tweeted last week how excited she is about this. We've heard testimony from those in education who are really fired up about the future of the potential of what this could turn into across the state.
Well, that's exactly right. So, go ahead.
Yeah, let's 2243, the Senate bill on the student loan forgiveness, and that was heard in front of Senate Appropriations last week. So Senator Shively presented that bill. There was an amendment to cap the loan forgiveness to $25,000 over 3 years. We've been supporting that bill all along, and then that's moving along.
Yeah, it is. It's moving along. This one is, frankly, it's the result of a lot of work for those of us that were on the Recruitment and Retention Committee, task force, I should say. We do have to do something in North Dakota to address the issue of teacher shortages. What this will do is it'll allow potential teachers, incentivize them to go to some of these areas that have trouble recruiting and retaining teachers because of their location, their small size, and so on. It'll incentivize them by allowing them to recoup some of what their investment has been in their education. We have very high hopes for this bill. It does come with a $6 million price tag, and so that number might not hold, but we're confident that something will come out of this. If it's not $6 million, then let it be something comparable or close to that. So,
yeah, and as you've been saying all along, this is something that has some real money attached to it that could really incentivize, as you said, getting teachers into rural areas in North Dakota and then those tough-to-fill subject categories as well.
Right, and it's time to do something about it. This is a bold step, but it's a very necessary step. So we are going to continue to fight like crazy to make sure that this gets a fair hearing on the other side and gets through in some form. So
a couple more updates from last week. Gun bills that we've been following. The committee broke that down into two subcommittees. So last Thursday and Friday, those two committees split and met. House Bill 1310 is the guns in schools,
yes.
And as I told you, as you were out of state last week, a lot of amendments offered to that bill, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, this is an amazing bill in a couple of different ways. One of them is that I've never seen so much effort put into keeping this bill alive. And this is not the first time this has been in front of the legislature. I think it's been there at least the last 3 sessions. But they're bound and determined to do something. One of the amendments that you mentioned is I think it's probably the leading amendment. They want to start like a test pilot,
yeah, pilot
if you will,
kind of program,
a pilot
yeah.
study of this thing. So they're going to choose 5 school districts, and if they have a retired law enforcement officer, that law enforcement officer will receive 80 hours of training.
Yep.
And they will be vetted by the superintendent and the principal, and then allowed to be serve as resource officers in that school. We don't know exactly which districts might take advantage of that. We're not even sure if this is going to pass. So I think that probably will clear the House. I don't know that for a fact, but it's an interesting bill to have followed.
Yeah, and they're meeting again this week, so that'll end up on the House floor sooner rather than later, I guess, and we'll know more about it, but a number of amendments considered last week. House Bill 1278 is the guns in public buildings, and I guess maybe in some senses we can just skip past that, because in the subcommittee meeting last week, there was talk that House Bill 1190 would just kind of take care of 1278, and 1190 also had some interesting amendments and allow certain people to authorize concealed weapons in government buildings.
Right, like the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, for example, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, the Governor could authorize individuals to carry concealed in government buildings. I'm not exactly certain if that is just confined to the Capitol building and its grounds, or if this would be government buildings that North Dakota leases or owns around the state. That much I don't know, but we testified against this bill. Our members have let us know overwhelmingly that they're not in favor of anyone but trained law enforcement officers having guns in government buildings where they work, and we think that they need to be respected.
And some of the questions you brought up, I know they were going to look into in leading up to the next subcommittee meeting. The amendments offered to House Bill 1190, just as a side note, were passed in the House today, so that'll head to the floor probably for a vote relatively soon.
Yeah.
House Bill 1246 is Representative Kaiser's bill, and that relates to the claims of employment discrimination and kind of streamlining that process, and that has passed the House by a vote of 65-25.
Right, it's a terrific measure. What it does is it allows public employees or state government employees to bypass the normal take it to your boss part of that thing, and they take it to the state labor department. They can go right to district court now and what that does is it expedites the matter in front of that's facing that individual if they have a discrimination suit, and we really do strongly support it, and we think it's a very good thing for public employees.
We've been talking a lot about Governor Burgum's 5% healthcare premium that he wants public employees to pay into. What we've reported to you and on these Facebook Lives is that there's no appetite for that in either chamber. But last week, Fargo Forum reporter John Hageman did a story and again had some quotes in there from lawmakers saying, we're not going to do this. But as you keep reminding me, never say never.
Never say never, and that's good advice, particularly in this environment where an amendment can be put on any bill as it gets into the crucial stages of the legislative session. So no, we're not saying that it's not going to happen, and we won't until after they've adjourned sine die, because anything can happen. Right now, though, it is true the Senate didn't want anything to do with it. The House, although I think Representative Carlson thinks that maybe he could have gotten it through the House, he didn't want to do that if it was just going to go to the Senate and die anyway. So I think that for right now, I feel very good about it. The governor, as I understand it, still wants that, but there isn't anybody in the House that's willing to put it in for him, or in the Senate. So we're hopeful of that, but we will keep our eye on this very closely.
Another development we've been following for quite some time in higher education is the Rule 605.3, which is that big tenure policy change, which would go from 12 months to 3 months in terms of dismissing faculty and tenured faculty. Thank you for the correction. And February 23rd is the full meeting, but this Friday, the subcommittee that was formed for that full board is meeting as well at 8:30, so we'll keep an eye on that.
Yeah, we will definitely have an observer posted to that. Ernst Pining from Minot State University serves on the State Board of Higher Education, and he is absolutely on top of this thing. I met him in the airport yesterday when I was traveling home, and he was also traveling back to Minot. But the issue here is really one of fairness. All across the country, to fire or to dismiss a tenured professor for, like, for example, you're in a tough budget situation like we are. To dismiss somebody like that, the process to be hired into a position is a year long. So they have granted tenured faculty a year notice if they were going to be let go. So we think that we should follow the established rules that have served not just North Dakota well, but the rest of the country well, and abandon this revision to 605.3.
And you testified against that a few weeks back, and we heard from all 11 campuses across the state and their concerns, and a lot of resistance, obviously, to this proposed rule change.
There is a lot of resistance, and there ought to be. We have an economy in this state that is cyclical. We are heavily dependent on commodities, in this case agriculture and energy. And we have seen historically there are ebbs and flows to those markets. Right now we are kind of in the downside of those markets, but they will come back because they always have. In addition to that, we're in the process of diversifying our economy, so we're not quite as dependent on those things. So one of the things that has served North Dakota well is that we don't panic when we get into these economic downturns. And I feel that any revision of 605.3, which shortens the length of time that a tenured professor has to be consulted prior to being removed, it's a bad idea. And it is one of those knee-jerk reactions, frankly, that will do more damage in the long run to the North Dakota university system than it will to help in the short run. So we want to make sure that yes, we do need to be responsible when it comes to budgeting, but we don't want to be making these mistakes that have long-term implications, negative implications for the universities that are located here in North Dakota.
Yeah, and importantly, our kids heading out to those universities in our future. You worked out of the office a lot of last week. You were in Washington, D.C. Tell us about meetings with Senators Heitkamp and Hoeven and other issues. I know a lot of things on the plate.
There are an awful lot of things on the plate, and I'll be sharing some of these on our Facebook page later this week. Once I have time to unpack them all. But of a particular interest was my meeting with Senators Heitkamp and Hoeven separately on the issue of Ms. DeVos. is when I took off, she wasn't yet confirmed. By the time I landed, she had been confirmed, and there was an awful lot of interest in that. As well, there should have been. I've said it here before, and I maintain that this is true. She is the least qualified person I've ever seen nominated to serve in that position. That said, she's there now. I visited with Heidi's representatives. She happened to be at a meeting at the White House, so she couldn't meet with me. But when I met with her staff, it was basically to thank them for their stalwart support of our members in this DeVos thing, and as well as to discuss a few issues that will be coming up in terms of education and public employees and higher ed in the short term in front of Congress. So we took care of that. Then it was over to Senator Hoven's office, and he spent an awful long time. I think we had a full half hour with him. And he was, I believe, impressed with the fact that we have so many of our members, and more importantly, even I think to him, was so many of our non-members, just people who care about education in the state, calling his office, writing him letters, writing him emails, and letting him know that, this isn't okay to put somebody as poorly qualified as Betsy DeVos in such an important position, particularly in North Dakota, where 89% of the people in North Dakota rate their schools as good or excellent. So we tended to mobilize our members and communities and folks all around the political spectrum that had contacted him. So this wasn't a one-off. This was something that people really are concerned about. And he assured me there that in his meetings with Ms. DeVos that she said that she would take care of and protect education in North Dakota, public education in North Dakota, the way North Dakotans wanted it protected. So she would be taking her cues from the state about what they wanted for education. We also discussed the fact that the Every Student Succeeds Act basically prohibits, it really weakens the office. There won't be anything like race to the top dollars or these incentives and bribes that Arnie Duncan employed to get states to do what the feds wanted. So if we can really concentrate our efforts, get to those school board meetings, let them know what kind of an education system we want in North Dakota, that's the kind of education system we're going to get, because ESSA is designed to kind of shield us from the feds in that regard. There was a friend of mine and a friend of our organizations. Her name is Miss Romanek, and she is Roxanne Romanek, and she is a terrific individual who's long cared about IDEA and funding for special education projects in North Dakota. I shared with the senator her concerns about Ms. DeVos's commitment to IDEA. You'll remember during her testimony in front of the committee that she didn't know that it was a federal program. She said, well, we should just leave that up to the states. Well, you can't, because it's a federal program, and it has to be managed by the federal government. And I had mentioned that, Mrs. Romanek had mentioned that, hundreds of letter writers had mentioned that, and the 1,000 or 4,000 people that called his office had mentioned something like that as well. And so he had talked to Senator Johnny Isakson from Georgia, and Senator Isakson has a letter from Ms. DeVos addressing those issues entirely, because Senator Isakson had asked her specifically to address those. And in that letter, and I'm going to get a copy of it and we can post it so that everyone can see it, she commits to fully funding and fully implementing IDEA and as part of her responsibilities. And of course that affects North Dakota. So that was the basic tenor of the meeting with Senator Hoven. I think, frankly, that went really, really well. He understood, I think, our passion and our commitment to education and our desire to make sure that the feds do no harm when it comes to administering education, their part, in the state of North Dakota.
Yeah, interesting and important updates from Senator Hoven's office. You mentioned some of those unified voices. I know you wanted to touch on that. There have been a lot of people that have stepped up to the plate recently on a number of key issues.
Yeah, and nationally, we know that there are over 1.5 million. There are over 1.5 million phone calls made. I mean, there are communications, and tens of thousands of phone calls. It was set a record for the switchboard at the Capitol. People were really, no pun intended, dialed in to this issue, and they let them know about it. In the state of North Dakota, though, through our communication platforms, we have identified 774 activists, member activists. These are members, your brothers and sisters in our union that are committed to being active. We had 27 people write letters so far in the state on the loan forgiveness issue. When the issue of those vouchers we talked about, they got turned into a study. 307 people bothered to contact their legislators in writing about the voucher issue, not counting any of the town hall visits or anything like that. We had, on the tenure petition that I just addressed, 605.3, 509 people signed a petition. I mean, that's an awful lot, and about half of those were done in the first 48 hours, so it's pretty amazing stuff. We have 96 people that have contacted their legislators about health insurance issues. 23 are about North Dakota standards, which are written by North Dakota teachers for North Dakota students. And there are 598 of the people, of our members, contacted Heitkamp and Hovind about the DeVos matter. So we are very, very proud of those folks who got out of their chairs or picked up their phones, wrote a letter, dropped an email. That's important to do. People need to hear from you. There's no substitute for that. They have to know you care. And if they think you don't care, then they probably won't respond in the way that we need them to respond.
And we're at the Capitol. We know it makes a difference.
Yes,
and
we do.
You can come to our website, ndunited.org, to find out how you can become a member activist.
Yep, you sure
as
can.
well.
And you sure should. So we look forward to seeing you.
Yeah, and again, follow along ndunited.org for latest news and anything across the board. Our Facebook page, our Twitter account at ndunited for updates throughout the week. And Friday, I'll put out another legislative update and bring you the latest happenings. And Nick, you said you'd unbundle some of the key points from your trip as well. So thanks for joining us again on this Monday afternoon. Have a great rest of your day.
And be in touch. Bye.